It's about time to clock in for my reading shift. This is the Reading Shifts tag. It was created by Hannah from Hannah's Books, and I was tagged by Anna G. And this is a series of quite introspective questions all about reading and how my tastes may have shifted over the years. And I like nothing more than a good introspective ramble, so let's get on with it. Question 1 is, how has your reading developed over your lifetime? Do the kind of books that bring you the most pleasure now differ from the books you loved most earlier in your life? If you've seen big changes in your reading since you've matured, what might explain your changing interests? Well, I think that for me, I have not so much changed my tastes as expanded them. I feel like most of the stuff, certainly from adolescence onwards, most of the stuff that I loved back then, even if I don't love it as much or the same way now, I still find something in it. And I've continued to add more strings to my bow, so to speak. So, you know, as a child and as a teenager, I definitely read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, and I still love those things. I also read a lot of humorous books, whether that was humorous sci-fi like Douglas Adams or other kinds of comedic writers. And while I don't necessarily have exactly the same tastes and exactly the same sense of humour as I did back then, it's still something that I do enjoy in my books now. But over the years, I have also added other things like more literary fiction, plays, murder mystery, poetry, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that although my reading has definitely developed and changed, I haven't really abandoned a lot of the stuff that used to bring me pleasure back then as well. That said, I do think that some of the stuff that meant a lot to me in my childhood, in my teens, doesn't quite hit the same way. I mean, I recently reread The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and when I was 12, that completely rewired my brain, and I became quite obsessive about Douglas Adams. And rereading it now, it doesn't quite give me the same feeling that it used to. And I think part of that might be because the more I read, the more I appreciate certain aspects of books, like character depth and strong structuring, which I don't think either of those were Douglas Adams' strong points. But also I think because that book meant so much to me, that whole series meant so much to me back then, and I kind of internalized so much of it. I can quote huge chunks of that book verbatim still. That maybe when I reread it now, I almost take it for granted. It's not surprising anymore because I know all of this stuff by heart. So maybe in a book that is supposed to be funny and surprising and unexpected, it's hard to get that same thrill from it when you just know it too well. Question 2 is, do you find yourself choosing different kinds of books at different periods of the year? For example, do the seasons affect what you read for pleasure? Similarly, might you read very different kinds of books while on vacation? Well, I can't remember the last time I went on vacation. As a disabled person, I don't find vacation very relaxing. It's a lot of hard work, travel, and finding accessible accommodation and all of that sort of stuff. So I think it's been about 20 years since I went away anywhere for a significant period of time. And when I did, I don't remember reading much at all. But when it comes to the seasons, I think they do somewhat affect my reading, but maybe not in the way you might expect. I think that I sometimes read against the season rather than with it. I find that the height of summer is too hot for me. It's uncomfortably hot, and I might end up reading something with a more wintry setting, or set on an ice planet or something, to kind of counteract the summer. And conversely, in winter, when the days are short and the nights are long, and I feel drained by just the seasonal depression, then I might read something warm and summery and fun. So, I suppose it's the equivalent of putting a bit of cold water in your tea, which I don't do, by the way, but just the principle is the same. Aside from that, I do find that I go through certain phases of particular styles or eras or whatever appealing to me and wanting to read a lot of that. But that tends to be independent of season. I'll just something will click in my brain, the switch will flip, and yeah, the hyperfixation will activate, and I will find that, yeah, I would like to read a lot of Terry Pratchett now, please. Question 3 is, do specific experiences in your life ever shape what you choose to read? For example, did you read obsessively about child rearing when your kids were little, about gardening as spring is about to begin, about the experience of grief when someone you loved died, etc.? Well, I don't have kids, and living in a flat, I don't have a garden. But yes, certainly the experience of grief, for example, can be a strong influence on what I read. I lost my mum in 2020, and certainly a lot of the stuff that I read around that time was certainly resonant with themes of grief. That said, I think grief is a pretty universal theme that pops up in a lot of books, and a lot of stories, a lot of films, a lot of music, etc. So I don't know that I necessarily chose to read books that were specifically about grief at that time. It's just that the books that I did read that fell into that category were especially potent. I remember rereading Hamlet, and it was around that time I got into Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series, which, although not specifically about grief, certainly something that I found really resonant and really comforting. So yeah, I do think that that certain kind of intense experiences do affect my reading, but it's not so much that I choose to read certain things based on my circumstances, as I find those themes especially resonant when I find them. Question 4 is, have there been any times in your life when circumstances have limited or changed your reading in some way, perhaps caretaking responsibilities, or a big move that made it hard to find as much time to read as you'd like, or personal illness that made it harder to concentrate, or maybe just long-term travel that might have limited your book choices. How do you deal with those circumstances? Well, the first thing that springs to mind for me is personal illness. In 2022, I had a very traumatic time of it. I won't bore you or disgust you with the details. I mean, I remember that when my dad bumped into a family friend and started telling them about what I'd been going through at the hospital, and he didn't notice until she had sat on the floor in the supermarket that that he was overwhelming her with the details. So, yeah, you don't want to hear about that. But yeah, that was a rough time, and it definitely impacted my reading. It was a long recovery period. Honestly, kind of the recovery period is ongoing. So, yeah, in the immediate aftermath of that, I wasn't reading any physical books for a few months. I would read a few ebooks on my phone, but most of my reading was with audiobooks. And even then, I wasn't really doing much of that. I was mostly listening to radio comedy instead, and stuff that required a little less concentration. I was quite exhausted from the experience and quite groggy from the drugs. So yeah, that was not a fun time. But yeah, I think that, yeah, things do sometimes just get in the way of reading. But ever since I kind of dedicated myself to reading every day, with the exception of that period, I mostly do manage to read every day, even if it's just a bit, but I usually manage at least an hour in the morning. So, yeah, it maybe kind of affects not so much how much I read or, whether I'm reading, as just my choice of books. I think the more robust I'm feeling physically and mentally, the more challenging the books I choose might be. Whereas back then, when things were particularly rough, I think I was probably reading more kind of comfort reading, more light and fun books, and a few kind of biographies as well, which maybe kind of weren't as challenging. Question 5 is, Booktube is full of discussions of reading slumps, when dedicated readers seem to lose interest for a while in books. Sometimes they just can't find a book that appeals to them. Have you ever experienced a slump? If so, how did you handle it? If not, do you have any advice to give people who are experiencing slumps? Well, I've definitely been through what you might call a reading slump, although I think sometimes a reading slump is kind of I don't know, it's a way of looking at it. I feel like calling it a slump makes it feel worse than if you just call it a lack of interest in reading at the moment. And slump suggests that you're trying to read and failing. And while I've experienced a bit of that, I think mostly it's just been, there have been times in my life when I just felt less inclined to read, but it didn't really upset me because I had plenty of other interests that were taking precedence at the time. I spent a lot of time, put a lot of time and energy into making music, and sometimes that meant not doing much reading. Same with, I might have been through phases of watching a lot of films, almost one every day, sometimes more than one a day. And yeah, I wasn't reading much then, but I was watching a lot of films and getting a lot out of that. I've acted in some amateur productions of Shakespeare, which meant that really all I was reading was the scripts of the play I was in. So yeah, I think that I don't necessarily know if I have any good advice for getting out of a slump, but I think that if you have something else in your life that you are getting something out of, that you are enjoying, that you're dedicating your time to, then it's okay if you're not reading as much or not reading at all. I think that it will come back to you. And in the meantime, try and find joy in whatever it is that you are doing. Because, just because you were used to getting joy from reading doesn't mean you can't find it somewhere else. Question 6 is, booktubers also talk about book hangovers, when readers are so moved by a book that they find it difficult to move on to a new book. Have you ever felt this way? Yeah, I think I have, but at the same time, I do tend to start reading a new book pretty much right away anyway. The longest that I'll go, certainly in the last 6 or 7 years, the longest that I will go between books is a day or two. If a book gives me a really strong hangover, I might not be able to start something the very next day, but probably the day after that I can start one. And I mean, recently I read Catcher in the Rye for the first time, and my thoughts definitely lingered with that book for days after I finished it. So it took a little while to sort of get my head in the game for the next book I was reading, but I still started the next book, and eventually that won me over as well. I mean, I also ended up really liking that book, so well done me. But yeah, I think that for me, a book hangover, like an actual hangover, doesn't really last beyond the next morning. Question 7 is, tell us about a few books that almost always work for you. Something that might have remained a favourite throughout your life, despite any changing reading tastes. Something that always seems to hit just the right spot when you need a lift. Or perhaps some lifetime book hangover where the text will always be at the back of your mind. Well, I think I just spoke about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and how that really has stuck with me. The text really is kind of part of the fabric of my brain now. But as I also said, rereading it now doesn't really work for me the way it used to. And I think that's quite true of a lot of the stuff that was formative for me. So it's really stuff from the last 6 or 7 years since I've been dedicating myself to reading daily that I have found stuff that continues to work for me no matter what. So Terry Pratchett is always a safe bet. Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series I've read through, I think, 3 times over the last 6 years, and that always works. Shakespeare is a pretty good bet, especially Hamlet, Twelfth Night, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing. And yeah, I think some children's books, but not necessarily the ones that I read as a child, but ones that I have discovered as an adult, like Kenneth Graham's The Wind in the Willows or A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh books, both of which I was familiar with from TV and film adaptations, but I didn't actually read them until I was an adult. But yeah, I think I've read Wind in the Willows 4 times now, and yeah, that never fails, really. So yeah, I think that there's definitely stuff that pretty much always works for me, but even then, I am quite a mood-oriented reader, and I don't think any single book is going to fit my specific mood all the time. But yeah, those are some books that certainly have a good chance of getting through. And the final question, number 8, is to tag people. So I'll have a look and see who hasn't already done this and tag people in the description below. And yeah, I look forward to hearing some more introspective rambles from my bookish friends. The bit at the end. So that was the Reading Shifts tag. Thanks again to Hannah for creating the tag and to Anna for tagging me. I'll put links to both of their videos in the description as well. So I'd love to hear in the comments if you have any answers to these questions or anything else that's on your mind. I'm always happy to hear from you. Anyway, that's about it from me today. I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you when I see you.